Stories matter. You matter. Taking time to see you and to recognize that God is at work in you, even when you don't believe it. Part of the goal of the church is to go, hey, we see God in you, and we trust God in you. Now, that phrase in particular is a little bit harder for some people to swallow. That is one of our core expressions, and for the next few weeks, that's what we're talking about here at Journey. This is the guts of who we are. And so, if you're relatively new to Journey, or you're visiting, and you're going, I wonder if this church is for me, this couldn't be a better time, because you're going to hear really about who we are. And hopefully for all of us, it's a reminder of going, hey, this is central to what we value. And this opening phrase, and there's some other phrases that go with it that I'm going to unpack in the next few weeks, but this opening phrase is a powerful one. We trust God in you. Now, this is saying a whole lot about what we believe about God. And sometimes that phrase, you might go, well, now hold on, people do really stupid things. What do you mean you trust God in them? I mean, we need to control what people do. What do you mean you trust God in them? Well, it's not that this is without boundaries. Again, we're going to come back to some other phrases that we think help buoy this phrase. But this phrase is really important because we think it sits at the heartbeat of who God is and how he has presented himself to us. Let's go to a passage in Romans chapter 8. Romans is a letter written to the people of Rome. So this people group would have been a very thoughtful, reflective, philosophical. I mean, Rome was the center of culture. It was the center of the world. Paul had to write a letter to the people living there in their context to help them in this young faith that was burgeoning, this faith that was wrapped around the teachings of Jesus. And so what he was doing was trying to help those who were curious, trying to help those awaken to who God is, but he was also trying to help those early believers find their way. And the biggest contrast, a lot of the early believers came from a Jewish background, was to help contrast, hey, the law that they'd followed for so long didn't work. And so he's got to help explain why the law didn't work. This was really personal to him because he actually traveled as a mercenary to help uphold the law. And when people didn't follow the law, he killed them for it. And that's his story. If you know any of Paul's story, he had a different name. I often call him Darth Saul, but he was, that's because that kind of captures it. He was like in the dark side. And he had this awakening. There's this moment where he literally has an interaction with the second person of the Trinity. I mean, this light blinds him. I mean, the metaphor, it's beyond metaphor. It's literal for him, but I mean, he carries this metaphor through some of his writing. This light blinds him. His interaction with Jesus. He's blind for 3 days, and he has a new awakening to a new operating system. He is born again. He recognizes that everything he thought about the world was wrong, and it was flipped on its head. And so now he spends a lifetime trying to write to people like him. It's this beautiful picture of a guy who totally gets with the way they're thinking because he lived it for so long, to the extreme. So this is a letter, this is the 8th chapter in his letter to the book of Romans, verse 29. We're going to go back to the earlier part of this chapter as well, but he says this, "For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters." That Jesus in some ways is almost like our elder brother. Jesus came to the earth to model for us what it meant to align, to be obedient to his Father. And when you hear the word obedience, whenever you're reading Scripture, just hear the word alignment. To align to the Father's will, to be immersed in the kingdom rhythms, to exist in this other operating system, to be in this other dimensional reality. These are all the teachings of Jesus, and Paul's explaining this about why Jesus came. And having chosen them, he called them to come to him. And having called them, he gave them right standing with himself. Here we're back to this alignment idea. And having given them right standing, he gave them his glory. And I always remind us, glory means something. We should maybe do I say this so much. All right, let's practice. Glory means something magnificent is going on. And it comes up so much, this could be a fun thing. So when I say, and glory means, something magnificent is going on. That's really nice. That might get old, but it's nice right now. So that's good, because every time you hear glory, hear that. It should be mind-blowing. God's glory, something magnificent is going on. The question is always whether or not I'm aware of it or not. So he gives his creation, this is what we learn about the character of God. He gives the creation a choice. God is a choosing being, and he gives his creation this same ability. Choice tells us something about his character, and this is important because it's this central rub between what I would call the teachings of Jesus, beautiful, healthy spirituality, and unhealthy religion. They come right down to this interface. God, is not presenting us a system or a way of being that's all about control. Instead, he's interested in love. And for love to be love, choice has to be involved. We've all had someone probably force themselves on us in some way or another. Whether the extreme that we think of, like rape, or you think of manipulation, and sometimes rape isn't just physical, you just feel that someone is trying to take something from you. And they might have even used this under the guise of love, but you know it's not love. Internally you know this is painful, this is force. Love does not control, love does not manipulate, love does not cajole, love does not force. Love always has an invitational quality about it that gives you the ability to choose. So why is this a central characteristic of our church when we say, we trust God in you? Is we're saying there's a temptation sometimes as we interact with one another to go, hey, I got this going on in my life. We might not say these words, sometimes we do, but sometimes this is what happens. Hey, I got this going on in my life, and it might be like, life isn't great and we'd like it tweaked, or my life is devastated, maybe because of my own doing or somebody else's. We come to one another and we go, I got this going on in my life, fix it. Fix me. And we go, we trust God in you. And usually you cuss at us. But because it's not really what you want. Most of us are not that interested in the cure. We just want relief. Just fix this. Tell me what to do. Give me a formula. And we go, well, I got a question for you. I don't want a question. I want an answer. But see, the nature of Jesus' teaching in God's way is to go, no, these questions are meant to carry you deeper because this is not a formula to be lived. It's a relationship in which you're known. Hard for us, because as soon as something goes well, we're like, ooh, how do I commodify that? How do I codify it? And how do I just repeat that in my life? That worked. I prayed that. That happened. I should do that again. Now we have our expectations. Remember the line about that? Expectations are premeditated resentments. Expectations are... This could be a lot of fun. And because every time I say that line, I'm like, oh. So we try to live in expectancy. That means this is fluid. That means we hold it loosely. That's why it's called faith. I'm believing, and I'm trusting, but there's a pretty good chance God's not going to do it exactly the way I have it framed up in my mind. And when he doesn't, I wind up in resentment. When I have it like, this is how it's going to go. But because what happens? He did a thing for somebody else or for you. You codify it. This is the law, by the way. And then it's going to happen the same way. And it doesn't. It's so frustrating. Because if it worked, you wouldn't need God. You could just keep your formula going. We all have a central reference point. This, by the way, could be a good kind of, do this week. Find a space, have some time of prayer, sit quietly with God and go, what's my central reference point? If I all of life kind of sits at this fulcrum. This is right here. Everything is measured by this. So, for example, whether or not someone is loyal. If they're not loyal, my life is blown up. Whether or not everything is just. If it's not just, I lose my mind. Whether or not it's perfect. If it's not exactly in the right place, I'm distressed. Find our ego has has this kind of reference point that we hold on to, central reference point. But with God, the reference point is him, and the only way the reference point can feel like it's really always moving, even though God never changes, He's a deep mystery. We can only scratch the surface of our understanding of him, and we have to visit with him to be in alignment with him and to feel the relational exchange, which is, I think, why Jesus says, give us this day our daily bread. You don't get a daily formula. You don't get a yearly formula, and then you could check out and check in with God, like, or maybe 2 times a year. You could check in at Easter or Christmas. But you don't get that. You don't like get, hey, twice a year. You get daily. If you'll come and interact with me, you'll find what you need. You'll have sustenance for the day. It's designed that way on purpose, because otherwise, left to ourselves, we're just going to forget about God. We're going to ignore him until one of 2 things happen. We're loved so intensely that we awaken again, or we suffer so intense. Those are usually the 2 great teachers. You can kind of boil, most of life comes down to those 2 great teachers. I was loved when I totally didn't deserve it. And I can't help but change. Or I'm suffering to the point where something has to be different. Our desire as a church is to interact with God, hopefully in this way he interacts, our understanding of the way he interacts with us. The goals of the church is not to control one another, but to serve one another. Now, serving one another might be some feedback. There are going to be times where you go, hey, tell me about this. We're going to hold up the mirror and go, well, what I hear you saying is, and we'll go, I'll give you some feedback on that. It sounds like that. If you do that, this is going to be really destructive in your life. Or it sounds like that could be really beautiful for your life. Sounds like that certainly is consistent with what we understand about God. And we'll give you feedback. We'll give you guidance. We interact with one another. There might even, if there's a destructive behavior happening, we may come and insert into your life and go, hey, this seems really destructive, and we'll enter into a conversation about it. But the goal is not to control you, because God doesn't control us. Love doesn't control. There's a freedom and an invitation in it. So the job is not to fix it. We have to say this. We have to remind our small group communities about this all the time. Because you'll go into a small group community, if you've been in ours, we call them villages. A lot of times our villages are like recovery groups. Like, I'm Jamie, I struggle with trying to achieve a lot of things. Or I'm a rescuer, or I got a lot of problems. I can give you a number of them. But you walk, you're sharing. So for instance, we could go in and I could go, hi, hey Jamie, how's it going? It's good, man, this week. Like, I just wanted to totally rescue this situation. I wanted to fix it. I didn't like the tension. I didn't like what it made me feel, and I did such and such. And so this is me. Basically, it's confession. I'm speaking out. This is a point of struggle. And a really great fellow traveler with me goes, man, I hear that. That must have been hard. Yeah, it really was. What do you feel like God's saying to you about that? Well, that's a great interaction. Here's what's a not healthy interaction, but it happens in churches all the time. I go, man, I didn't like that. Well, Jamie, look, first of all, you've been struggling this for a long time. So sooner or later, you're going to have to get over this. Secondly, I'm going to give you 3 steps to how to not deal with this problem. Okay? So the problem is, others of us, we do the very thing I'm confessing. We want to fix it. We want to remove the tension. Or what happens sometimes, you'll get in a small group community like that, and somebody starts to share, and there's emotion in the room. You feel the emotion. Maybe somebody starts to, the person sharing cries, or somebody else cries. Somebody else doesn't like feeling. They've worked for years not to feel anything, so they have to make a joke quick to remove the tension. And then we're like, yeah, right, okay, good. Okay, I don't have to feel anything again. Let's go back to the narrative. People do jokes all the time like that. And the problem is, sometimes the people who do that, they've been doing it for so long, they're really funny. Like, it's funny. It's good comedy. But that person's just jacked up in their own way because they don't want to feel anything. So then you got to be like, oh, I'm really feeling something. Hey, that was a funny joke. Are you feeling anything? No. What would it be like to feel something? You'll probably get another joke. What would it be like to not tell a joke? See, this is good community. It's us asking questions. It's us being curious. I was with a friend over the weekend, and she said, I think curiosity is the 6th love language. And she said, because I think sometimes most of us just have trouble being curious with one another. We don't actually lean in and care. We're not available to listen We have such a tendency to just try and go, you're in a storm, let me get you out of the storm, rather than going, man, how do you just align with Christ in the storm? And look around to see that there's still glory happening. There's something magnificent going on. And so can we say to one another, this is part of our hope as a church, can we say to one another, hey, your questions don't intimidate us or scare us. They're welcomed. You go, yeah, but I got some questions about God. I think God's a genocidal God, and I got questions. Okay, let's talk about that. The questions are just a reflection of where you're at on your journey. That's okay. The questions aren't right or wrong. They simply are. And you'll probably hear us say at some point, I trust God in you. You might be like, but I don't believe in God. And you might hear us go, and we trust God in you. Which might make you frustrated. But it's our belief. It is at the core of what we understand both the story of Jesus to be about and what it's like to be the church with one another. Let's continue looking at what Paul said to the people of Romans. This is Romans chapter 8, verse 3. And I'm reading from the Message version because it's a little bit playful, and I love the way he captures the story part of this. God went for the jugular when he sent his own son. He didn't deal with the problem as something remote or unimportant. In his son Jesus, he personally took on the human condition, entered the disordered mess of struggling humanity in order to set it right once and for all. The law code, this is when you hear that the Old Testament was a setup of a law that was meant to prove that you can't do it perfectly. That was part of the deal. Now, if you lived according to versions of the law, you're going to find that elements of your life would work better. But ultimately, it would always leave you empty because you couldn't do it perfectly, and that's the point of a law, to follow the rules. The law code, weakened as it always was by fractured human nature, could never have done what God has done for us. The law always ended up being used as a Band-Aid on sin instead of a deep healing of it. So perhaps you even grew up in a church experience where behavioral modification was the primary focus. Do this, don't do that. And there's a lot of conversations about do this, don't do that. And so maybe there was a lot of energy with you about do this, don't do that. But ultimately what happens with that is sooner or later you didn't do that and you did do this. And you're not, ultimately there becomes a point of struggle, an emptiness that comes with I'm running this hamster wheel, and like, how do I ever move forward? Because I'm living a life where the things I want to do, I'm not doing. And the things I don't want to do, I do. This Paul actually wrote that in another part of this letter to the Romans. I'm in this ever-present tension that I want to be perfect, but I'm not. And so what does that mean about me? And does that mean I'm not lovable or loved? And then maybe we hear something about God's love and God's grace, but what does that mean if my behavior is always slightly off? If as you came into the door today, we had like a little drill, and we like went down deep into your subconscious, and we're like, hey, we're going to go after like every impure motive that's in you. You might go, I'm in a really good place. Like, I feel I'm walking in the Spirit. I feel a great deal of freedom. But we drilled down. We probably could find some impure motives in there because you still have this broken, fractured human nature. So there's always something kind of off. How is that resolved if we can't fix it ourselves? Well, it's only resolved, this is the point of Paul's teaching, it's only resolved by love. It's only resolved by relationship, not by living it out perfectly. Now what the law code asked for, but we couldn't deliver, is accomplished as we, instead of redoubling our efforts and trying to strive harder, simply embrace what the Spirit is doing in us. Let me give you an example. Have you had the moment where something exciting happened in your life? You had a success, you got a gift, you had a thing, and you wanted to share it with somebody. And you wanted to share it with someone that you thought might be excited with you. And you went to share it with them. And you have the moment. By the way, I couldn't wait to tell you. You tell them, and I wrote the hit song, and I made the big deal, and I got a promotion, and I'm gonna be married, and whatever the thing is. And they go, oh. Now, depending on your personality type, that's an interesting moment. If you're an 8, you go, oh, I almost cussed. If you're an 8, you go, what the heck is that? That's all you're going to say to me? I mean, this is a big deal. Because there's a sense of like injustice, right? You like feel the anger just rises up in you if you're an 8. If you're a 1, you're like, well, I guess I didn't say it right. It wasn't perfect. I should think through how I'm going to say that. If you're a 3, by the way, I'm doing Enneagram types right now. It's a personality thing. If you haven't heard anybody talk about someone annoying in your friend group is going to talk about it sooner or later. Right now, it's me. If you're a 3 and you just do that thing, you go, I didn't say it exactly the way they wanted to receive that. Maybe if they were sitting down, they would have taken it a little bit differently. If you're a 5, you're like, I really should have researched how exactly to frame that up. Anyway, so we all respond differently. But here's the point. You shared something like, wow, and the person was like, yeah. In that moment, take the tension right there that moment. There's a big question, first of all, about identity. Does that person define who you are? Because for those of us who in that moment, especially if this is a mother or father, some of this might be close to home because we just came off the holidays. You're like, yeah, definitely had that just a few days ago. That moment, in that moment, especially if somebody's close and they kind of have a powerful place in your life, do you go, like it just totally takes the air out of you. And it drops you into a place of unworthiness or shame. Something just collapsed about your identity because you were counting on this other person to define you in that moment, or maybe validate you. Now, is it wrong? I mean, I think most of us are going to be disappointed if someone isn't excited with us, right? That's kind of natural. But the question is what happens with us. Do we, so this is this point of the scripture, do we go, this would be a really healthy expression. Okay, internally. That kind of stunk, but that's my dad. He's got his own struggles, he's got his own pain. Truthfully, he probably feels threatened, he might be jealous, he's distracted, he's preoccupied. I don't feel seen in this moment, but he's on his journey, and I trust God in him. That eventually, in this life or the next, he's going to awaken to truth and see that celebration and curiosity are ways to receive and express love. And I say to myself, I trust God in me. I had this moment. This was a test. This is my opportunity for salvation. Because my ego is about to do a nosedive. And the only way it's going to stay up, because here's the striving, right? The striving is I'm going to redouble my efforts. So in that moment, you go, some of us, especially those of us who are gluttons for punishment, we're like, I'm just going to take another pass at that. Oh. I'm pretty good with words. I like stories. I didn't get that kind of reaction. And then what happened is, I dropped the next package. And I go, Sorry. You can relate. Thank you. I'm not alone. Confessing. But this is how, we have these moments all the time. This is like a daily thing. But if instead I go to that moment, I go, my opportunity for salvation. Remember, codependency is if you're not okay, I'm not okay. So that's what it's testing. Am I going to be in a codependent reaction? Or do I go, I'm totally exactly who I am before God, and this is okay. Now, I'll be honest, the temptation is like, I'm going to call a friend. Where's Paul Farmer? He'll be excited with me. Like, I'm going to go call somebody who will, like, rectify this situation. Or in that moment, do I just go, no, God, we're good, right? Yeah, we're good. And trust me, that little thing right there, that was good for you. Because what happened? You just checked in with me. If that person just celebrated your thing or whatever else, you might have even kind of kept the conversation going, and then you're not going to believe what I did. actually you were not in a good place, that would have spun you into an ego place in a different way. So I actually stalled you right there so you would check in and remember where this came from. We have these little moments all the time. And the question is whether or not we're checking in with God. Are we checking in with the Spirit? This is what Paul is saying. Those who trust God's action in them find that God's Spirit is in them, living and breathing God. Obsession with self in these matters is a dead end. But attention to God leads us out into the open, into a spacious, free life. This resurrection life you receive from God is not a timid, I love this line, this resurrection life, this other way of living, this new life, is not that you've received from God. It's not a timid grave tending life, like, well, I'm about to die anyway. Like, it's not that kind of life. Just religion, you're not supposed to enjoy life. This is, you only have sex to procreate. Like this is the grave tending life, right? Is that too much? Anyway, that just rolled out. It's adventurously expectant. Greeting God with a child like, here's the wonder. We talked a lot about wonder last year. Greeting God with a child like, what's next, Papa? God's Spirit touches our spirits and confirms who we really are. We know who He is, and we know who we are, Father and children. So as a church, we feel like one of the central characteristics of who we are is when we interact with each other is to remind each other of that. Hey, I'm really struggling with, man, I trust God in you. Oh yeah, God's in me. Like sometimes that's what we need to hear. We need to be reminded. And, oh yeah, I trust God in me. His Spirit is alive in me. This is not about me redoubling my efforts. It's not about me striving more. It's not about me taking another pass. It's not about me trying to figure it out. It's not about greater understanding. It's not about a new explanation. It is about the simplicity of this relational moment. And when you come up against those unmet expectations, if they are expectations, or you come up against a disappointing interaction, or you come up against your own failure, it's a behavioral action that actually was really destructive, or it carried with it the aroma of death. You feel it. And you're in that precipice of, you can go to shame and let your identity collapse, or you can go to guilt, which says, oh, that actually isn't who I am. And most of the time, when on the backside, like for instance, perfect example of this is however you do anger. If you do anger like blow up rage, and your adrenaline's up and you're losing your mind and your face is red, and then the moment happens and you light somebody up and the door slams or they walk out and then it's silent. And you're coming down off that adrenaline high and you're like, oh, that wasn't good. And you feel how gross it is, that moment. Or if you do anger and rage through silence. Like, I know how to take them off. I'm just going to stay silent. I'm going to stay silent. I'm going to stay silent. And the same thing. Broken connection, and here you are in your silence. And you have enough recognition like, I really just hurt that person. And you are attentive enough to your this inner self, your soul ultimately. You're attentive enough that you go, do you go to shame, broken identity, or go to guilt, conviction, and go, that's not who I am. Guilt, conviction, immediately, if it's healthy, it takes you to confession. You want to speak it out. Which sometimes that's then the phone call of, hey, I blew that. Or sometimes it's in a journal, or sometimes it's in prayer. But that moment becomes very relational. Shame, isolating. That's how you know the difference of what's going on in you. That moment comes, you blew it. Which way do you go? Lean into relationship, this way or this way, or do you isolate? I'm not good enough, God. I blew it once again, and I'm not going to talk to people. I'm never going back to the church. I'm never going to say that again. I'm never going to talk to that person again. That's that point of interface. This is the Spirit calling out to you going, that's not really who you are. That's not who I am in you. And you aligning, going, that's true, it's not. I got to speak that out. I need to repent. I got to change that. Good, because you're loved. I'm not loved. I'm not lovable. This is never going to change. People are jerks. I'm never going to be around people. I don't understand you, God. There's the difference. Einstein is famous for saying there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is though everything is a miracle. And it's that childlike wonder. That every interaction becomes a gift. So what if before we confess another sin, or before we celebrate another achievement, or grieve another loss, we pause long enough to simply be, to just be in the presence of another person. We trust God in you. I don't have to fix you. I don't have to respond codependently. God's doing something in you. I'll give you feedback. But I'm going to resist the urge to try and make you conform to my image, because I think God might be helping you conform to his. Our dog died yesterday, and we have 2 dogs, and Sophie lived a full, in dog years, 92 years, so she lived a full life. And so we could kind of tell that her body was shutting down. All the signs are there. And we took her to the vet yesterday, and he confirmed what we feared was true. And so we took the dog in, and we have 4 kids, and so the kids kind of, each of them last night, or the night before, and then in the day, kind of came and said their goodbyes. And so, Angie and I stayed with through the process, and, it's funny how those of you who've been in the presence of death, whether it's a person or whether it's an animal, like when she died, their eyes were still open. It's like you just see the light's gone. Like, and isn't that interesting? That's even the phrase we use. Like, the light has gone. And we have a 12-year-old, and she's taken it the hardest. And it was a really hard day for her, as you might imagine. And I just see those tears coming down her face, and I see the sadness, and I'm like, I want to fix this. I want to fix it. I don't like being sad. And last night, I just kind of laid my head on her arm next to the bed, and I just said, that hurts, right? Yeah. When you love deeply, you hurt deeply. Yeah. Yeah, that hurts. Then we just laid there. But it's so bad, I was like, well, I want to give you some perspective. You know what happens with death? And I have all these things going through my mind. I just felt the Spirit so heavy, like, shut up. God is very direct with me sometimes. Just be. Just be. This is part of her story. It's her first great sorrow. It's going to be in her life for probably her whole life. And the most important thing is not to take it from her. It's to trust God in her. Trust God in me. Romans chapter 8, verse 1 says this, there's therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Every moment, whether it's a disappointing interaction with a human being, whether it's the death of someone or something you love, every moment is this opportunity to go, am I going to live aligned in my flesh, or am I going to live awakened to the Spirit? John 14:20. In that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I am in you. Thomas Keating says this, the spiritual journey is a process of dismantling the monumental illusion that God is distant or absent. He is present. He is alive in you. It's just whether or not you want to awaken to it. There is never a place to get, only a place to be. If we could remember that the journey is the point. We wish we could be done with this struggle. I wish we could get to this thing. I wish I had this aspect of maturity. I wish this tension was resolved. No, the tension is there as the teacher. So just bless it. The financial struggle, stop fighting it. And bless it and say, thank you, God. We keep making terrible decisions, and it's our opportunity for salvation. It's reminding us that we need you and we're imperfect, and so we're going to show up again and pay attention to the budget, or we got to work this extra job, or we got to do this thing. The relational tension, but she just doesn't see me. He doesn't understand me. God, thank you. It's reminding me that I need you, and I have to pay attention to you and me and know that you're at work in them, whether I see it or not. Ultimately, the center of that core expression says it all. This is a story of trust. Do you trust God? Or do you have to keep taking life into your own hands? Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? Stare at the floor, close your eyes, whatever helps you focus. Is there a thing in your life? Is there a tension? Is there a struggle? Is there an awkwardness? Are there huge questions? Is there a broken relationship? Is there a disconnect? Could you look at that thing and use a camera lens, so to speak, like look at it away from you, not you in the middle of it, you like look in on your story. And maybe you see yourself in that interaction, maybe you just see the interaction, maybe you see the tension, whatever the thing is. But would you look at it separated from a degree for a second? Can you acknowledge it? Let go of anger, resentment, bitterness. Can you acknowledge that it's there to be a teacher in your life? Whether it was brought on by you or brought on by another or both, that God redeems all things. That he takes beauty from ashes. And that thing that's the greatest tension might be the soil that gives birth to the greatest blessing. Would you listen to the Spirit? And would you talk to God about what it looks like for you to not strive and push and pull, but instead to trust God in you and God in the other? So have a time of prayer, listening, speaking, be in the moment.